Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking Down Braves Boys podcast. This podcast is going to be a little different than what we've talked about essentially for the entire summer. We always talk about how the offense is going to mesh together, how certain guys fit into the offense, their scoring profile. But I wanted to talk about some of the finer things in basketball, such as the dirty work. And I think that's about as important as how good Notre Dame's offense is how well do they rebound, how well do they defend, how experienced are they, how much athleticism is around this team, and just kind of how they do things outside of scoring, and that's just as important in modern basketball as what percentage you shoot from three, especially in college basketball. So wanted to talk about that for a whole show, especially in the dog days of the offseason like this. Right now, Notre Dame is recruiting Parker Friedrichsen and has a commitment from Markus Burton, but really in between recruiting news stories at the moment. Parker Friedrichsen is the main one, obviously. 3 or 4-star guard, depending on where you look. Combo guard from Oklahoma, one of the leading scorers in Oklahoma high school basketball this season. Took a visit to Notre Dame a few weeks back. I was told that visit went well, and that Friedrichsen wants to make a decision somewhat soon. I would guess the next month or two is when that decision will come. He still has a few visits to take, though. Visited Notre Dame and then immediately went to Davidson, then went to Rice, Nebraska, and Northwestern. Sorry, is going there in the next few weeks. So certainly recruitment to follow for Notre Dame. Friedrichsen isn't going to be your JJ Starling, Blake Wesley elite type recruit, but is ranked somewhat highly, consensus top 150 player in the country, and primarily known for his shot making. The main ability that he has is really to shoot it from three and hit shots off different platforms with a hand in his face. He can shoot it off the bounce a little bit, can catch and shoot, but when he gets to Notre Dame, if that's the school he ends up choosing, you would think of him as kind of like a Dane Goodwin, Steve Astoria type. I'm not comping those guys, although I think Astoria is about as solid of a comp you can get out of a former Notre Dame player. But those are two guys who have kind of had that catch and shoot, stone cold killer role as shooters, and almost all of Mike Bray's best teams have had a guy like that. Notably, those two guys as that. But overall, I think Friedrichsen's the kind of guy who probably won't be an NBA player. Probably won't be, the prototypical. This guy's going to be a huge riser. He's going to have 13 points a game as a freshman. He's going to play awesome defense. I'm not sure that that's Friedrichsen's game, really. He reminds me more of like a Fletcher Lawyer who's going to Purdue this year, a Sasha Stefanovic type who just kind of plays his role well. He's going to hit shots when he's open. He's going to kind of energize the team with some of the plays he makes, and is kind of developing a little more in the other aspects of basketball. And I think he does have a little bit of a higher ceiling than a guy like Sasha Stefanovic ended up having, because I think he can create a little bit more. Has a nice floater game that he's developing. Has a little bit of mid-range game. I think he's still developing as well. I do think there's some potential off the dribble there, but obviously not as high as a JJ Starling, Blake Wesley type, or even Markus Burton, who's committed to Notre Dame in this class. He's ranked 124th recently by 24/7 Sports. It's now a consensus 4-star, and that's a huge ranking boost for the Notre Dame commit, Markus Burton, who Notre Dame grabbed while Burton was essentially a mid-major prospect, had only offers from mid-majors before Notre Dame. Notre Dame was the first one to pounce on him, and Burton committed immediately. Now Notre Dame taking that gamble on him is starting to show off in the rankings a little bit. Ranked 124th in the class, and consensus 4-star between them and rivals, and I believe on 3 as well if they've updated the rankings. But if Burton is anywhere near that ranking, he's certainly a steal for Notre Dame, just because of the offer list he had, and Notre Dame was on the fence about the offer for a while, it seemed. And if Burton can play up to that ranking, even in a year or two at Notre Dame, then he will certainly be a nice value for Notre Dame out of what you thought was maybe not even a 3-star. I don't think he was even a 3-star when he committed to Notre Dame by most sites. So nice pickup for Notre Dame there, and they were not going to let that guy who was right under their nose get away from them. And just great to see Notre Dame having another 4-star commit, because this class had potential to look really bad rankings wise if they can land Friedrichsen and Burton. will look a little bit better on paper, although I don't think that's as great as a lot of the classes they've had in the past, like the 2022 class, which was one of Mike Bray's best. 2021, I think, is probably also a little better than just those two, but Notre Dame's also offered guys like Brady Dunlap, who it seems like they might be trying to get in the fold. So certainly an interesting class. It's a lot different than what Notre Dame's had because a lot of the guys they went after early, like Aiden Holloway, why are the other guys slipping my mind? But I've talked about all those guys a lot. Notre Dame, some of them seem to back out. Some of them seem to have no chance by the time they committed, like a JP Estrella commitment. But now they're still finding a way to potentially build a nice class late in the process. Maybe not as nice as it would have been with a TJ Power or JP Estrella and Aiden Holloway, but still could be a really nice class for them. And they're building it late with guys that they hadn't reached out to until just a few months ago. So be really interesting to see how this class kind of unfolds for them and whether they can be big time players for a guy like Brady Dunlap. They're certainly players for Parker Friedrichsen, and I wouldn't be shocked if when he does make that decision, if he is coming to Notre Dame. I'm not guaranteeing that though. So it's 3 visits left to take, and 2 of those are Power 5 schools, Big Ten schools, where I do think he is a nice scheme fit. So going to be really interesting to see how this class unfolds. But what I really wanted to talk about in this podcast was just the dirty work for Notre Dame in 2022, 2023. And it's great to actually talk about basketball again rather than just recruiting. So excited to get into it. Notre Dame, first, you got to look at the defense. That's something Notre Dame revamped and was a huge part of their tournament success and tournament hopes last year. Even being a possibility was their defense. Anthony Solomon and Antony White came in, really hammered home the point of you got to defend, you got to move your feet, you got to guard. And Antony White helped them kind of revamp that zone that was incredibly ineffective 2 years ago. If you watched the Louisville game from a few years ago, you would pretty easily see that Notre Dame's zone was essentially useless that season. Just something for opposing teams to shred through. Now it's not that. Now Notre Dame has some length. They have some at least basic principles defensively that they want to hone in on. And I think it's going to be better than it has been, except for last year for sure. I'm not sure this group is going to be as good as they were defensively last year. I do think they have maybe a higher ceiling just because of they have one more good shot blocker than they had last year. They had 0 good shot blockers. Ven-Allen Lubin has the potential to be a really nice one, even though he's a little bit undersized for a 5. He's more of a tweener. I do think he can be a really nice shot blocker, though, just because the athleticism he has. They have a little beef down low with Matt Zona or Dom Campbell, who can kind of come in and provide some fouls at the worst against an Armando Bacot or a John Hughley, maybe a Jesse Edwards. Notre Dame always needs guys like that with how they want to play. They need somebody to come in and just kind of do some dirty work for a minute, and I think they have that down low. On the perimeter, you don't quite have the athleticism you have last year, at least the top-heavy athleticism, but this year I think all around they could be a better unit because they lose Prentice Hub and Blake Wesley, who I don't believe was that great of a metric defender, at least, even though he certainly passed the eye test on that end. You have Markus Hammond, who has length. JJ Starling has length and athleticism as well. Cormac Ryan's going to be the anchor on the perimeter out there. And then you have Dane Goodwin, who isn't a great defender. Trey Wertz isn't a great defender. But overall, I think they have a good amount of length, and they have potential to be kind of a step-up group like they were last year. They have a chance to step up from what they have. I think all around they're a better defensive group, at least on paper. We'll see how they kind of develop as a unit. But I think they're a team that's really well built to run a zone. I think we could see that a little more this year, just because of all the length they have. I think on the interior, it's certainly concerning that their best defender could be a 6'8", 6'9" freshman in Ven-Allen Lubin. Nate Laszewski, I think, got better in that area, but neither of those guys are guys that I trust to guard the ACC's best bigs one-on-one. So I think this team could really thrive as a zone team. And as a man team, they have at least some potential as well, just because of the length they have and the athleticism they have around the perimeter on that end. But Notre Dame, I think, will probably be, if I had to guess, a mediocre defensive team in the ACC. The interior is what I'm really concerned about. Maybe one shot blocker. not much physicality outside of guys that aren't currently slated to be rotation guys, and not really any answers for Armando Bacot, John Hughley, Jesse Edwards. So the interior is what I'm concerned about. The perimeter, I think they'll be fine. I don't think they're going to be like a Press Virginia type defensive team or one of the better defensive teams in the nation. I think that's maybe an above average group in the ACC on the perimeter if Anthony Solomon can kind of help them hone in on what they need to hone into, and it can improve some of those guys technically. I think Starling can be a really good defender. I think Hammond can be a really good defender with good coaching. Cormac already is, and then you kind of have what you have with Dane and Trey. But I do think there's some ceiling on the defensive end, at least on the perimeter, and it might take some time, but they could be a really nice defensive team out there. Interior, though, obviously what I'm concerned about, and I think that could cause them to play some zone, kind of try to slow the other team down a little bit, and try to negate some of the dominant bigs that we see in the league. So, man, I enjoy talking about defense, but Notre Dame, I think potential on that end. They have length, they have size, they have some athleticism. Can they parlay that into a good defensive team? Last year they were mediocre, maybe above average in the country, and they really just need that again because the offense this year, at least on paper, is much better than it has been. So, well, has been relative to a lot of things, relative to before last year. If they can have a similar offensive output, maybe a little bit better, and then maybe a slightly worse defensive output, it's probably a tournament team again. So, something to think about there. And it's a team that, if they can defend well enough, can beat almost anyone in this ACC, which is not that strong of an ACC. It's probably not as down as it was, but certainly a lot of beatable teams in the league. Looking at athleticism, we talked about a little bit. I'm not sure that this is one of Mike Brey's more athletic teams. They do have a little bit of athleticism down low. Ven-Allen Lubin's a different type of athlete than they've had down there. I think he's one of the better athletes they've had down low in a long time, probably Zach August-esque. I can't even really think of others. Maybe Juwan Durham comes close to Ven-Allen Lubin, but it's a guy who's a little different. Then you have a good athlete, really underrated athlete in J.J. Starling. Hammond's a solid athlete. And then you kind of have a repeat of what you've had. So athleticism-wise, a few really good athletes. Overall, not a super athletic team. Cormac's a solid athlete, but I do think that it's one of his more athletic teams, which is not saying that much, just because they do have a few individual really solid athletes that are going to pop out on the page at you. So athleticism-wise, maybe mediocre in the ACC, probably a little below. Rebounding is where the concerns lie. Not much beef down there outside of guys who aren't rotation guys generally. Ven-Allen Lubin's going to give you a little bit of it. Nate Laszewski's probably going to be your best rebounder. Dane Goodwin's going to give you a little from the perimeter. Where else is it coming from? Notre Dame's going to have to figure that out. Can Ven-Allen Lubin turn into a solid rebounder as a freshman? I don't like betting on that. Can Dom Campbell and Matt Zona find a way to get in the rotation? Those are probably two of your higher ceiling guys rebounding wise. But are we really banking on those guys being ready based on what Mike Brey said? So rebounding is certainly an area of concern for me. And the rebounding and interior defense is what's going to screw this team if they are not good. If they're not a tournament team, it's because of rebounding and interior defense or an injury. And I think rebounding and interior defense not being good and not having a low post threat, those are probably more likely outcomes. And they're really banking on a guy like Matt Zona or Dom Campbell becoming a playable big just so they can have that in any capacity. But rebounding is probably my biggest concern. Shot blocking is a concern. And interior defense is also a concern. So they're going to have a lot of questions to answer there. I think their guards do a nice job with the dirty work, especially like a Cormac Ryan and JJ Starling. Those are the two that really stick out in that area. But man, the interior has a lot of questions to answer, and they have a somewhat high ceiling in most areas, but just not enough beef in a lot of areas. And that's really going to be tested in the non-conference as well. Michigan State, I think, is a team that they can get away with not being awesome rebounding against, but they're going to see some really, really solid bigs like Asana Sajala. You're going to see some guys at Marquette who are going to challenge them, and they're going to have to be ready to rebound pretty much all season. And I think non-conference is a nice test for them just in that area. But man, rebounding I'm concerned about. The one thing that I think Notre Dame has in terms of the little things / dirty work kind of experience. This is one of Mike Brey's more experienced teams. As of late, Markus Hammond's a fifth-year senior. JJ Starling, the freshman, is about as experienced as you can get as a freshman. Cormac Ryan's a fifth year. Dane Goodwin's a fifth year. Trey Wertz is a fifth year. Laszewski's a fifth year. This is an old team, man. And 6 of the 7, actually probably 5 of the 7 rotation guys are old. And they have Robbie Carmody on the bench too. So this is a group that I don't think will struggle with experience, and that's going to help them maybe more than some of these things that I've talked about, even more than the athleticism. Stuff like that is the experience. They know how to play together. At least some of them do. And they've all played high-level basketball. There's not a lot of huge question marks on this team, which makes my job a little harder because you're kind of evaluating the question marks. But in terms of individual players, you kind of know what you have in most spots. And I think Mike Brey really likes that and likes kind of that he has some constants and he knows what he has, even if a lot of them haven't played for Notre Dame in super huge roles or haven't played for Notre Dame in general. But I think he likes what he has. There's not really any guys that you're coming in and you're like, this guy, we have no idea what we're going to see out of him. Ven-Allen Lubin's the closest thing to that. And he at least has a high floor because of the athleticism. But experience is what's going to carry this team. The rest is all a little bit of a work in progress. I think in a lot of areas, they're average to maybe even below average in the ACC. The athleticism has potential to be higher than that. Rebounding, I think if you have average rebounding for this Notre Dame team, it's about as good as you're going to get. Experience, obviously, above average. And I guess that's all I really talked about. But really enjoyed doing this podcast. Let me know what you think about some of the little things about this Notre Dame team, whether they will kind of derail them and outshine their offense that will probably be really, really good. So appreciate you guys watching. We'll probably have some good stuff coming out soon, working through some potential episodes that are coming soon. So I appreciate you guys watching. God bless.